Hello and welcome to Learn English Easy.
Oh, you're really...
I'm currently recording this from inside what can only be described as a fortress of blankets.
I could hear it in the audio, actually. The acoustics are a bit muffled. It adds a certain ambiance.
I am looking out the window and it is looking absolutely gnarly out there. The wind is just howling. The trees are coated in this layer of glass. It's serious.
It certainly is. And judging by the architectural integrity of that blanket fort, I'm going to assume your survival strategy primarily involves ordering takeout before the roads close and just hoping for the best.
Hey, listen, I tip the delivery driver very, very well, okay? I'm doing my part for the local economy. But yes, my personal survival skills they're questionable at best.
Fair enough.
But we are not just here to complain about the cold or, critique my interior design choices.
Right.
It is Sunday, January 25, 2026. And if you are listening to this anywhere in the United States right now, you probably know exactly what we are about to talk about.
We are talking about Winter Storm Fern.
Correct. And this is a massive system. We're not talking about a little flurry here. We are talking about a weather event that is currently hammering roughly 40% of the entire U.S. population.
It's staggering.
But this deep dive isn't just a weather report. You can get a weather report anywhere. You can just look out your window.
Exactly. We want to understand the machinery behind the storm, the systems that are being stressed.
Yes. We have the snack of sources that tells a much bigger, much more complex story. We are going to look at the meteorological beast itself, of course, but we are also going to look at a statutory emergency order that came out of Washington just yesterday.
Right.
That mentions, and this part absolutely blew my mind, it mentions artificial intelligence as a primary reason our grid is stressed right now.
That is a fascinating and, frankly, a somewhat alarming detail that we really need to unpack. It's new.
It's brand new. We're also going to look at why natural gas prices are exploding. I mean, truly, truly exploding. We're going to look at why power plants freeze, even though we know winter happens every single year.
It's the perennial question.
It is. And then we're going to zoom all the way down to the local levels, specifically Oklahoma City, to see how emergency managers actually handle a disaster like this on the ground.
So it's a journey from the stratosphere all the way down to the fuse box in your basement.
That's a great way to put it. So let's get into it. Segment 1. The situation report. What are we actually dealing with right now, today?
Well, as of Sunday, January 25th, we are looking at a system that is just staggering in its geographic footprint. It stretches about 2,000 miles.
2,000 miles. That's hard to even visualize. That's the width of the country.
It almost is. It stretches from the border of Mexico and Texas all the way up through the Midwest, deep into New England, and it's even crossing into Canada. It's a massive cold core, low pressure system.
And you just called it Winter Storm Fern, which I did too. But I feel like you need to give your little disclaimer about the names.
I do. It's my meteorological pet peeve. The National Weather Service, the NWS, they don't actually name winter storms.
Right, that's the Weather Channel.
That's a practice that was really popularized by the Weather Channel. And the NWS argues, I think with some merit, that winter storms are very different from hurricanes. They aren't these distinct, swirling eyes. They're messy. They're multi-lobed systems.
So naming them Fern or Goliath or whatever, it can be misleading.
It can be. It sometimes overhypes what's just a typical winter day, or it can confuse the public. It's largely a marketing thing. It's branding.
But it's easier to talk about, right?
It is much easier for communication, I'll grant that. Fern is way easier to hashtag than, low pressure system 4B.
Right.
And honestly, looking at the data for this specific event, maybe this one deserves a name. The sources are all indicating this isn't just snow. If it were just snow, we'd grab our shovels and we'd deal with it. The real danger here, the thing that scares the engineers, is the ice.
I saw that in the Hindustan Times report we have in this stack. They used a very specific phrase. They called it a catastrophic band of ice.
That is the exact phrase, catastrophic ice. And we are seeing predictions of significant ice accumulation stretching all the way from East Texas to North Carolina.
And for anyone who hasn't lived through a major ice storm, you have to understand what that actually means. It's not just slippery roads.
Oh, not at all. You have to understand the physics of it. A quarter-inch of ice doesn't sound like much at all.
It sounds like nothing.
It sounds negligible. But a quarter-inch of ice on a standard power line adds hundreds of pounds of weight to the span between two utility poles.
Mm.
It turns that wire into this heavy, sagging cable.
And if you get more than that?
If you get up to a half inch, which is possible in some of these areas, you are talking about snapping utility poles like they're toothpicks.
Yeah.
You're talking about massive tree limbs coming down on roofs, on cars. It's incredibly destructive.
And we're seeing records being broken that go way, way back. Little Rock, Arkansas already broke a snowfall record that had stood since 1899.
1899. Just think about that for a second.
Sure.
That gives you a sense of the historical magnitude of this thing. This isn't a once every 5 years storm. This is breaking century-old records.
And it's not just in the South. New York City is expecting historic snowfall to start today as well. So it's a two-pronged attack.
It really is. You have the crippling ice in the South and the heavy blanketing snow in the Northeast. It's a massive disruption.
And when you have that much frozen precipitation, everything just stops. The travel numbers we're seeing they're insane. Over 14,000 flights have been canceled.
And you have to think about the cascade effect of that. 14,000 cancellations doesn't just mean 14,000 planes didn't fly today.
Right.
It means crews are displaced, pilots are stuck in the wrong cities. The planes themselves are literally frozen on tarmacs. So even if you aren't in the direct storm path, your flight from, say, Phoenix to LA is probably affected because the whole network is paralyzed.
And it's not just planes. Amtrak has canceled dozens of trains. The roads are treacherous. I saw ODOT, that's the Oklahoma Department of Transportation. They're deploying 1,500 plows. But
even a plow really struggles against a solid sheet of ice. You can plow snow, you can't really plow ice. You can only treat it and hope for the best.
But the infrastructure worry that keeps emergency managers up at night, it's not the planes. It's not the trains. It's the power grid.
It's always the grid. The grid is the absolute backbone of survival in this kind of weather. It's heat, it's communication, it's everything, and we're already seeing the cracks.
The latest reports are showing over 100,000, up to maybe 135,000 customers without power already.
And that's still very early in the storm.
That's the terrifying part. That number is just going to climb, and it's going to climb fast. We're seeing significant outages already in Texas, Louisiana, Virginia, and New Mexico.
A pretty wide geographic spread.
And tragically, there have been fatalities confirmed already.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah.
At least 4 confirmed so far. And usually in these early stages, that's from things like traffic accidents or exposure, people sliding off icy roads. But as the power goes out for longer periods, the risk shifts to hypothermia indoors and, tragically, carbon monoxide poisoning from people trying to heat their homes improperly.
And the economic impact. The early estimates are already floating around $24 billion in damages.
$24 billion. It's just, it's a number that's so big it's hard to wrap your head around. That is the GDP of a small nation, just wiped out by frozen water.
It really is. But what makes this deep dive so interesting and why we wanted to do this today is that while the storm is the cause, the reaction to the storm, that's what reveals how fragile our systems really are.
It exposes the wiring.
Yeah.
Literally and metaphorically.
Which brings us perfectly to the document that dropped late last night. This is where, for me, things get really, really interesting. We have an order from the Department of Energy, order number 202-2601.
And this is a heavy document. It's dense, it's legalistic, but it is incredibly significant.
It really is. The Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright, he issued this emergency order yesterday, January 24th, and it's specifically for the ERCOT region.
So that's Texas.
That's Texas. And to understand why this is such a big deal, you have to understand ERCOT, right?
Right. Most people don't realize that Texas is largely on its own power grid, mostly isolated from the rest of the country.
Why is that?
They did it decades ago, primarily to avoid federal regulation. But the downside of that independence is that when they get into serious trouble, they can't easily just, borrow power from their neighbors in the Eastern or Western Interconnect. They're basically an electrical island.
An island that's about to be hit by a hurricane of ice. So the Secretary declares a statutory emergency. What does that actually mean? Is that just a fancy way of saying we're panicking?
It's a legal trigger. It's not panic. It's a formal declaration that the situation is critical enough to bypass standard laws and regulations. The order explicitly states that, quote, demand is outpacing supply.
That's a bad sentence to see in a government document.
It's a very bad sentence. It cites a sudden increase in demand and a shortage of generation facilities. Basically, the grid is blinking red. They're running out of juice.
But here's the nugget that it blew my mind. I'm reading through the background section of this order, and I'm expecting it to be all weather talk, right? It's cold, people are using their heaters more, that kind of thing.
The standard stuff.
The standard stuff. And then suddenly, I see the sentence. It says, the surge in demand is being driven by, and I'm quoting here, rapid technological advancements, including the expansion of artificial intelligence data centers.
That caught my eye, too. That is a defining detail for the year 2026.
I mean, just stop and think about that for a second. We are talking about a winter storm. We're talking about ice and snow and wind, these ancient elemental forces. And the federal government is officially citing artificial intelligence as a reason we might all freeze in the dark.
It is the absolute collision of two worlds. You have the physical world, the weather, the ice, the cold, and it is colliding head-on with the digital infrastructure we've spent the last decade building at a frantic pace.
We've seen this explosion in data centers to train and run these massive AI models.
The chatbots, the image generators, the coding assistants, all of it. And you have to understand, those data centers consume a truly staggering amount of electricity. They run hot, they need constant cooling, and they draw massive amounts of power 24/7.
They're what's called baseload demand, right? They don't turn off at night.
Exactly. They never turn off.
Yeah.
So the grid is already stressed by this new, massive, and constant tech demand. And then you layer a historic freeze on top of that existing stress.
The camel's back is breaking. The margin for error that we used to have is just gone.
It's gone. We used to have a buffer in the grid for extreme weather events. That buffer has now been eaten up by data centers. And the order mentions domestic manufacturing, too.
Right. So we're using more power than ever to be this, tech superpower. And now the weather is suddenly taking away our ability to generate that very power.
It's a perfect storm in every sense of the word.
So what does this order from the DOE actually do? It's an emergency order, but what is the secretary actually commanding? Is he telling people to turn off their AI?
No, nothing like that. He's issuing what is essentially, it's a permission slip to pollute.
Okay, let's unpack that. That sounds drastic.
It is drastic. So under normal circumstances, large industrial sites, data centers, commercial facilities, they all have backup generators.
Right, for emergencies.
But these generators are often diesel-fueled or they're older natural gas units. The point is, they're dirty.
They spew a lot of smoke.
They spew particulate matter, nitrogen oxides, all the stuff the EPA and local air quality boards hate. So they have very strict environmental permits that say you can only run this for X number of hours a year for testing, or you cannot run this if it puts out X amount of emissions.
Because we want clean air. That makes sense.
We do. But this order from the Secretary of Energy authorizes ERCOT, the grid operator in Texas, to tell these facilities, turn them on, run them full blast, and ignore your air quality permit.
It's a break glass in case of emergency situation for the entire state.
It is the absolute last resort. The order specifically says this is to be used before they have to declare an energy emergency alert level 3.
And level 3 is?
Level 3 is when they have to start doing rolling blackouts. So they're making a calculated choice. They are choosing dirty air over a dark, cold grid.
They're calculating that the risk of people freezing to death in a blackout is greater than the risk of increased air pollution for a few days.
That's the grim calculation they have to make. And the political context here is pretty interesting, too. The order itself cites executive orders from President Trump regarding a national energy emergency.
I saw that. It's Executive Order 401-56 and 100-262.
Yes, and those orders frame the energy shortage as a direct national security threat. The language is very focused on insufficient energy production and the need to strengthen the reliability of the grid at all costs. This DOE order is the operational arm of that policy.
And it's temporary, right?
Oh, yes. It's very temporary. It's effective only until 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on January 27th.
So for the next few days, Texas is in a state of exception where the normal rules don't apply, all because the grid is teetering on the absolute edge.
Precisely. It is a triage situation. And if we pivot to look at the energy markets, we can see exactly why the grid is teetering. It's not just that the demand is high, it's that the fuel itself is disappearing.
This brings us to segment 3. The freeze-off. I have to tell you, I saw the data on natural gas prices, and I thought it was a typo. I literally refreshed the page because I couldn't believe the number.
It's not a typo. The markets are screaming. Let's look at PJM. That's the grid operator for the Mid-Atlantic, so it covers places like Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland.
A huge population center.
A huge population center. They saw their wholesale electricity prices jump from around $200 per megawatt hour to over $3,000 per megawatt hour.
From $200 to $3,000. That's a 1,400% increase in the cost of electricity.
In a matter of hours. And it's all tied to natural gas. The spot prices at the Henry Hub, which is the main pricing point, the benchmark for the whole country, spiked to over $8. $8.15 per MMBtu.
And the futures market?
The futures market rocketed up more than 70%. The sources say that is the single largest weekly gain since 1990.
Okay, so you have to explain this. Why? We hear all the time that the U.S. has plenty of natural gas. We're the Saudi Arabia of natural gas. We frack, we drill. Why does the price explode just because it gets a little cold?
This is the cruel, cruel irony of our modern energy system. We absolutely rely on natural gas for two critical things in winter: heating our homes directly and running the power plants that generate our electricity.
The two biggest demands.
Exactly. But natural gas production itself is incredibly vulnerable to the cold. And this is the freeze-off concept.
Right. Tell me what that means.
It's a physical process, not an economic one. Natural gas doesn't come out of the ground perfectly clean and dry. It comes out with moisture, water vapor, other liquids.
Okay.
When the temperature at the wellhead, the top of the well, drops below freezing, especially in places like West Texas or Oklahoma, where the equipment isn't always fully insulated for Arctic blasts.
Because it's Texas, it's not supposed to get that cold.
Exactly. That water vapor that's mixed in with the gas turns to ice. It freezes solid inside the pipes, inside the valves. It freezes the big compressor stations that are needed to push the gas down the pipeline. It's literally like a garden hose freezing solid in your backyard.
So precisely at the moment when everyone in the state is cranking up their thermostat and the power plants are screaming for more fuel to meet electricity demand, the wells stop producing that fuel.
It is the most vicious cycle imaginable. The sources are estimating we're losing a significant amount of gas output. Potentially 10% of the total U.S. gas production could freeze off during this storm.
10% of the national supply just vanishes overnight.
It vanishes instantly. And that creates this feedback loop. Supply drops off a cliff, demand spikes through the roof, and prices just explode.
And that price explosion causes some really weird behaviors in the market, right? I saw something about zombie plants coming back to life.
Yes, this is a classic sign of a stressed grid. Zombie plants is an industry term for old, inefficient power plants. Usually they're old coal or gas plants that just sit there idle because they're too inefficient and expensive to run in a normal market.
They can't compete when electricity is, what, $30 or $40 a megawatt hour?
Exactly. They'd lose money on every electron they generate. But when the price hits $3,000 a megawatt hour,
suddenly that clunky, dirty old plant is a gold mine.
it is an absolute gold mine. So
Yeah.
they fire them up. If the price gets high enough, anything that can generate a spark gets turned on. It is pure economic desperation meeting opportunity.
This all brings up a huge question for me, and I'm sure for a lot of people listening. We know winter comes every single year. We know ice happens. We had Winter Storm Uri in 2021. We had Elliott in 2022. You'd think we would learn.
Right.
Why do the power plants keep failing? Why does the gas keep freezing off?
And that leads us directly into our next source. This is the EPRI guideline.
Segment 4, the science of winterization. We have this document, the Seasonal Readiness Guideline from EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute, and it reads like a manual for how not to destroy a billion-dollar power plant in the winter.
It really does. And the very first thing you learn from this document is that winterization isn't a one-time thing you do in the fall and then forget about. It is a continuous, year-round cycle.
I saw that chart they have. It's winter prep, then winter execution, then restoration after the winter, and then it goes right into summer prep. It just never ends.
It never ends. And one of the key points the guide makes is that the killer isn't always just the absolute low temperature. It's the fluctuation. The temperature changes create condensation in places you really, really don't want it.
Okay, let's get technical for a second because the details here are fascinating. What are the specific little things that break and cause a whole plant to shut down? The document mentions heat trace a lot. It sounds like a sci-fi term.
It does sound cooler than it is. Heat trace is actually very simple, and it's absolutely critical. So imagine you have a small pipe carrying water to a critical sensor, or maybe it's the sensing line itself. Just a little tube that tells the main computer what the pressure is in a bigger pipe. You wrap an electric heating wire around that little pipe, right under the insulation, to keep the fluid inside from freezing. It's basically an electric blanket for a pipe.
That seems simple enough, so what goes wrong?
Here's where it goes wrong, and the guide is very clear about this. Sometimes, during summer maintenance, a mechanic needs to work on that area and they turn the circuit for that heat trace off. Or maybe a breaker trips over the summer and nobody notices. If you don't have a meticulous written checklist to verify that every single heat trace circuit is on and working before the first freeze hits, that one little pipe freezes solid.
And if that little pipe is a critical sensing line?
If that sensing line freezes, it might send a false signal to the control room. It might suddenly say pressure is 0 when it's actually perfectly fine. The automated safety systems see that 0 pressure signal, and they do what they're designed to do. They panic and trip the entire power plant offline to prevent an explosion.
All because of one forgotten switch on one tiny wire, and the lights go out for 100,000 people.
It is that fragile.
Yeah.
Another huge one they talk about is insulation. It sounds so basic. But you might have great insulation on a pipe, but if a mechanic had to check a valve back in July and they cut a small square out of the insulation jacket and didn't put it back perfectly,
The cold finds the gap.
the cold finds the one tiny gap. And it's worse than that. The document describes something they call a chimney effect.
This is wild.
Was that if you have a vertical pipe and the insulation is a little loose at the bottom and a little loose at the top, the heat rising from the pipe itself creates an updraft. It actually sucks freezing air in at the bottom, pulls it right up along the surface of the pipe inside the insulation, and vents it out the top. The insulation itself creates a wind tunnel that can freeze the pipe faster than if it had no insulation at all.
That is just diabolical.
It's just physics working against you.
Yeah.
And wind chill penetrates walls, too. The guide talks a lot about louvers and dampers. These are just giant vents on the side of the plant buildings to let air in for cooling in the summer. If they don't seal up perfectly tight in the winter, the inside of the plant becomes the outside.
There was a section in there about the polar vortex lesson, which seemed really relevant for a storm like Fern.
Yes, this is crucial, especially for the southern United States. Power plants in the north, say in Minnesota or Canada, are built enclosed. They're essentially indoor facilities. But plants in the south are often open-air designs. The turbines and generators are basically just sitting outside under a simple roof. It's cheaper to build, and it helps with cooling during the brutal summer heat.
Which makes perfect sense for 11 and a half months of the year in Texas.
Exactly. But when a polar vortex pushes sub-zero temperatures down to the Gulf Coast, those open designs are completely defenseless. All their instruments, all their sensors are exposed to the freezing wind unless they've gone through the trouble of building temporary enclosures or special heated boxes for all the critical components.
But the part of this document that really, honestly, it scared me the most was the human element. They keep talking about something called tribal knowledge.
Ah, yes. The great enemy of reliability.
Explain that, because normally, we think of knowledge as a good thing. Tribal knowledge sounds like wisdom being passed down through generations of operators.
And in some contexts, it is. But in a complex, high-stakes engineering system like a power plant, tribal knowledge is a massive liability. It means Bob knows how to do it. It means the procedure isn't written down in a formal manual, it's just stored in someone's head. Bob knows that you have to jiggle the handle on the number 3 pump to keep it from freezing when it gets below 10 degrees.
But what if Bob retires? Or what if Bob is sick that day?
Then the plant freezes and goes offline. The EPRI guide is absolutely adamant about this. You need written, verified, laminated checklists for everything. You cannot rely on memory. And you have to change the culture. The staff has to understand that something as simple as opening a door to go for a smoke break could let in enough cold air to freeze a critical sensing line near that door and trip the entire unit.
It's just an incredibly high-stakes environment. It's a battle against physics, but it's also a constant battle against human error and complacency.
And that battle doesn't just happen at the power plant. It happens in city halls and in emergency operations, bunkers all over the country.
Which takes us perfectly to segment 5. We've looked at the feds, we've looked at the market, we've looked at the engineers. Now let's look at the people on the ground. We have the Oklahoma City Emergency Operations Plan.
This is a fascinating document because it shows you the real-world application of what's called the Incident Command System, or ICS.
It sounds very militaristic.
It actually comes from the world of wildfire fighting, originally. But the core idea is that in a crisis, you don't want a rigid hierarchy where everyone is waiting for the mayor to tell them what to do. You organize by mission areas.
Right, I saw those. Prevention, protection, mitigation, response, and recovery.
It's all about distributed coordination. The fire department knows its job. The public works department knows its job. ICS just provides the framework for them to talk to each other and work together without getting bogged down.
I was reading through the annexes of this plan, and some of the details are surprisingly tender. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but
I think I know what you're referring to.
the PETS Act.
Yes. The Pets Evacuation and Transportation Standards Act. This is a crucial detail of modern emergency planning.
The plan for Oklahoma City explicitly references this federal law that requires them to plan for the evacuation and sheltering of household pets. It's not just save the humans, it's officially no dog left behind.
And that was a very hard lesson that we learned from Hurricane Katrina. Do you remember the stories?
I do. People wouldn't evacuate.
People refused to get on the buses or leave their homes because the shelters wouldn't take their dogs or cats. They stayed in their flooded homes, and many of them died because they would not abandon their pets.
That's just heartbreaking to think about.
It is. So the government realized, to save the humans, you have to save their pets. It's not just a feel-good measure. It's a pragmatic move that recognizes a fundamental part of human nature. The OKC plan has specific logistics for animal sheltering right alongside human sheltering.
Speaking of human nature, I found this section on the outdoor warning sirens really surprising. You know, I grew up in the Midwest. I hear a siren, my brain immediately thinks tornado.
Exactly. And that is a huge, huge problem during an ice storm.
The OKC plan says they test their sirens every Saturday at noon, unless it's freezing or there's a storm. And crucially, they specifically do not sound the sirens for winter storms.
You have to think about the psychology of it. If you sound that big, loud siren during a blizzard or an ice storm, people are conditioned to think tornado. So what do?
They look outside, they run to the window.
They might even run outside to look for the funnel cloud. Or they might grab their kids and get in their car to drive to a public shelter.
Which is the absolute last thing you want them to do when there's a half-inch of ice on the roads and power lines are snapping.
Precisely. You do not want thousands of people panic driving on treacherous roads to get to a shelter because they think a tornado is coming. So the plan is very disciplined. Sirens are for tornadoes, period. Use other systems like text alerts, TV, radio for the blizzard. You have to manage the public's reaction just as much as you manage the storm itself.
The plan also mentions something called DEF links.
Yes, the accessible hazard alert systems. It's a great example of how granular this planning has to be. It highlights that you can't just rely on a sound-based siren or a radio broadcast. You need specific channels and technologies to reach the deaf and hard of hearing. You have to reach everyone.
And they have this master list, this checklist called the EEI, the Essential Elements of Information.
I love the EEI. It's the dashboard for running a city during a crisis.
It's a checklist of questions the emergency manager needs to have answers for, updated constantly. Some are obvious. Is the airport open? Are the city buses running? But then there are others like, how much food is in the city's food bank?
And that shows the shift from immediate response to long-term recovery. It's not just, is the road plowed? It's, are the most vulnerable people in our city going to be able to eat tomorrow? Because if the delivery trucks can't get to the food bank for 3 days, you have a secondary crisis on your hands.
And the document makes it clear why they're so thorough. It lists the city's disaster history, the October 2020 ice storm, the February 2021 storm Uri. They have been hit hard before.
That's why the plan is so detailed. Emergency plans are often written in the scars of previous disasters. They know exactly what went wrong last time. The pets, the confusion over the sirens, the food bank running low, so they write a specific procedure to fix it for this time.
Okay, so we have the government issuing emergency orders, the market going absolutely crazy, the engineers fighting condensation with checklists, and the cities hunkering down with their plans. Let's bring it home.
Segment 6. What does this all mean for us, for the listeners who are, sitting in their own blanket forts right now?
Well, if you are in the path of winter storm, Fern, the advice from all the sources is immediate and it is urgent.
Charge everything.
Right now. Do not wait until the lights flicker. Charge your phone. Charge your laptop. If you have medical devices that rely on electricity, charge the battery backups right now.
And there was a big safety warning about generators that we absolutely need to repeat very clearly.
Never, ever, ever run a portable generator indoors. Not in your house, not in the basement, not even in the garage with the door cracked open.
Why not? Carbon monoxide. It's a colorless, odorless gas that will kill you. It is a silent killer. And every single major storm, we see fatalities from this. The generator has to be outside, well away from any windows or doors.
Okay, but beyond the immediate safety tips, there's a bigger picture here about the grid, isn't there? The sources talk about the future. How do we stop this from happening every single winter?
The article we have, Why Winter Storm Fern Could Put the Grid at Risk, makes a very strong case for building more transmission.
More power lines connecting the different grids.
Right. We talked about Texas being an electrical island, but even the other grids, the eastern and western interconnects, they need better connections between their regions. During Winter Storm Elliott a few years back, Duke Energy in the Carolinas was forced into rolling blackouts because they needed more power. But they couldn't get enough from their neighbors because the transmission lines, the pipes for electricity, weren't big enough, or their neighbors simply didn't have it to spare.
So we need more connections between regions. If it's freezing and calm in Chicago, but it's sunny and windy in Florida, we need to be able to move that power.
That's the idea. And that ties into diversification of the energy sources themselves.
Right. We talked about natural gas freezing in the pipes.
Exactly. Wind and solar power don't rely on fuel deliveries that can be disrupted. The sun doesn't freeze in a pipeline. The wind doesn't get stuck in a valve.
Well, the wind turbines themselves can freeze if they aren't properly winterized, right?
That is true, and it's a critical point. But the fuel source itself, the wind is still there. If you invest in winterizing the turbine blades with heaters, they work just fine in the cold. The argument in the source is that a diverse mix of sources is inherently more resilient than putting all your eggs in the natural gas basket, especially when that basket is so vulnerable to the cold.
And the last point was about better forecasting.
We need to get better at it. We need to know not just what the weather will be, but how human beings will behave in response to that weather. In past storms, utilities have consistently underestimated how much power people would use when it gets that cold. They need to use AI, ironically, the same thing that's driving up the demand, to get much better at predicting that demand.
So let's wrap this all up. We've gone from the macro, this 2,000-mile wide storm, all the way down to the micro, a frozen sensing line in a power plant. We've seen how this storm named Fern is a massive stress test for our entire 21st century infrastructure.
It is a continent-wide stress test, no doubt about it.
We started with the joke about learn English easy, but honestly, after going through all this, understanding these documents, the orders, the manuals, the plans, it feels like the only way to really understand how our world actually works.
It really is. We all take the light switch for granted. But behind that one little switch is this massive, incredibly complex and fragile machine involving global energy markets, federal laws, and a guy named Bob trying to remember which valve he's supposed to turn.
Which brings me to our final provocative thought for everyone listening.
The tribal knowledge problem.
Exactly. The EPRI guide, the Expert Engineering Manual, said that relying on tribal knowledge in a power plant is dangerous. If the plan isn't written down, it's a huge risk.
And that doesn't just apply to power plants, it applies to us in our homes.
Right. So here is the question for you, listening right now in your house, which is hopefully still warm. If your personal power grid goes down today, if the lights go out and the heat stops, do you have a plan?
And is that plan written down? Does your family know where the flashlights and the extra batteries are? Do you know how to shut off your main water line if the pipes burst to prevent a flood? Or is it all just tribal knowledge stored inside your head?
Because if something happens to you, or if you aren't home when the power goes out, that tribal knowledge is completely useless to your family.
You don't be the power plant that failed because nobody bothered to write down the checklist.
Stay warm, everyone. Stay safe. And if you are in the path of Fern, please take this seriously.
Absolutely.
We'll see you in the next deep dive.